Sarah had always been the type of person who believed in doing everything for her daughter. Every decision she made, every sacrifice, was driven by the simple, yet powerful need to provide a better life for Emily. As a young single mother, she had faced more challenges than most people her age. With no family nearby to help, she had learned to navigate the complex world of work, daycare, and endless bills on her own. It had been a struggle, but Sarah never complained. After all, Emily was worth it. When the letter arrived, it felt like a sign from the universe. It was an invitation to interview for the director of marketing position at a major tech company, an opportunity she had dreamed about for years but never thought she would be able to pursue. She'd applied for the job on a whim, knowing that the chances of getting it were slim. The company had been looking for someone with years of experience in the industry, and Sarah's resume, while solid, was not exceptional. But the offer to interview felt like fate. This could be the break she had been waiting for. The excitement that came with the invitation was immediately tempered by the overwhelming pressure of the situation. It wasn't just a career move, it was a life changer. The position was a chance to finally break free from the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck, and the financial stability it promised was enough to make her heart race. But there was also the challenge of juggling this opportunity with motherhood. Emily was still so young, and Sarah had no one to help care for her while she attended the interview. The thought of leaving her daughter with a stranger at a daycare facility for the first time made Sarah's stomach twist in knots. It was a decision she had to make, but the guilt gnawed at her. Still, Sarah couldn't pass up the chance. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent weighing the pros and cons, she made the decision. She would go to the interview. She would do whatever it took. After all, this could be the ticket to a new life for both of them. The day of the interview arrived with a rush of nerves. Sarah carefully chose an outfit, something professional, but not too flashy. She had learned the hard way that looking too put together could be a double-edged sword in the corporate world. She didn't want to appear like she was trying too hard, but she needed to make a good impression. She also made sure to double-check Emily's things: diapers, snacks, extra clothes. Everything she could think of to make sure the daycare staff would have everything they needed in case of an emergency. As she drove to the company's headquarters, her thoughts were consumed by the weight of the moment. This was her chance, the opportunity she had worked for. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Would she be good enough? Was she even qualified? The questions echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now. Arriving at the sleek, modern building, Sarah felt a wave of awe wash over her. The glass walls and sharp lines of the architecture seemed so distant from the small, humble apartment she called home. She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. She wasn't just a single mother from a small town anymore. She was Sarah, a woman who had worked tirelessly to get where she was. She belonged here, just like anyone else. Inside, the lobby was immaculate: polished floors, elegant furnishings, and a quiet hum of productivity. The receptionist greeted her warmly and handed her a visitor's badge. As she sat down to wait, her nerves began to build. She checked her watch. The interview was due to start in 20 minutes. She couldn't help but glance around, wondering if any of the other people in the lobby had also come for the same position. Most of them looked confident, well-dressed, like they belonged. Sarah felt out of place, but she tried to calm herself. Emily was depending on her. After what felt like an eternity, a man emerged from one of the side doors and called her name. He was tall, with neatly combed dark hair and a sharp suit that made him look like someone who was always in control. He extended his hand with a firm but not overly aggressive grip. "Sarah, welcome. I'm James, the HR director. Let me show you to the interview room." As they walked down the hall, Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension. James looked like he had everything figured out. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp, and his demeanor exuded professionalism. Meanwhile, Sarah felt like she was barely holding it together. She had spent hours preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, all she could think about was her daughter and whether she was okay. James led her into a conference room where the interview would take place. The room was brightly lit, with a long glass table and a few chairs. He gestured for her to sit, then took the seat across from her. As they exchanged pleasantries, Sarah noticed how calm and composed James was. It was easy to see why he held such an important position at the company. He was in control, confident, and unflappable. Yet, As Sarah began to explain her experience and qualifications, she couldn't help but feel that there was something different about him. He was paying attention, really paying attention, not just to her words, but to the way she spoke, to the little details that showed just how much this opportunity meant to her. It wasn't something she had expected, and it made her feel a little more at ease. But little did she know, everything was about to change in a way she couldn't have predicted. This interview, which she had prepared for so long, was not just about her qualifications. It was about to reveal something much deeper, something neither she nor James could have anticipated. The interview had been going better than Sarah expected. Her nerves were still there, of course, but she felt like she was holding her own. She had practiced her answers over and over, memorizing the key points she wanted to highlight. But there was something else that seemed to be happening between her and James. He wasn't just a recruiter interviewing her for a position. He seemed to be connecting with her on a deeper level, even though neither of them had spoken about anything personal. As the conversation shifted from her qualifications to her personal life, Sarah felt a sudden hesitation. It wasn't something she often shared, but there was a part of her that wanted to explain why this job meant so much to her. She glanced down at the photo she had tucked into her bag earlier that morning, the picture of her daughter, Emily. It was a simple photo, just Emily playing in the park, her big blue eyes shining with happiness. But to Sarah, it was everything. Emily was the reason she worked so hard, the reason she kept pushing forward no matter what obstacles came her way. "Would you like to see a picture of my daughter?" Sarah asked, almost nervously. She wasn't sure why she was asking. It wasn't like her to bring up personal details during a job interview, but there was something about James that made her feel as though he understood. James raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised, but nodded. "Of course," he said, his voice kind and genuine. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out the photo, handing it over to him. As she did, she noticed a subtle shift in James's expression. He looked at the photo carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the little girl's face. For a brief moment, Sarah wondered if he was judging her, wondering if he thought she was too sentimental for a corporate position. But then, something happened. His gaze softened, and he seemed to freeze. There was a strange look in his eyes, one Sarah couldn't quite place. It was as if he had seen something in the photo that triggered a memory, a distant, fleeting thought that he couldn't quite grasp. Sarah, unsure of what was happening, watched him closely. But before she could ask if everything was all right, James blinked and quickly handed the photo back to her. "That's a beautiful picture," he said, his voice sounding just a little more distant than before. "You must be very proud of her." Sarah smiled, grateful for the kind words, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. James was no longer the composed, distant recruiter she had met at the beginning. Something had changed in the air between them, something that made her wonder if there was more to this encounter than just a standard job interview. As the interview continued, Sarah couldn't help but glance at James every now and then, trying to figure out what had caused that strange moment of stillness. She had no way of knowing that this small, seemingly insignificant exchange would set the stage for something far more profound, something that neither she nor James could have possibly imagined. Sarah sat back in her chair, trying to push the lingering sense of unease from her mind. The interview carried on with the usual professional banter, questions about her background, her work ethic, and her goals for the future. Yet, there was an undercurrent that neither of them acknowledged aloud. It was as if the air in the room had thickened slightly, charged with something unspoken. James seemed to regain his usual composure, but Sarah noticed a subtle change in his demeanor. His responses were still polite and professional, but his eyes kept flickering back to the photo of Emily that she had just handed him. It wasn't the sort of attention that Sarah had ever experienced in an interview, and she couldn't help but feel both flattered and a bit unsettled. She had always been the type to separate her personal life from her professional one, but something about this man made her want to share more. There was a warmth in his presence, an understanding that she hadn't expected from someone in his position. Still, she quickly reminded herself that this was a job interview, not a social hour. She couldn't afford to let her emotions get the best of her, not when this opportunity was so important. James, sensing the subtle tension, shifted the conversation back to the job itself. "Let's talk about your experience in leadership," he said, his voice returning to its usual calm and controlled tone. "Managing teams, setting goals, meeting deadlines. How do you approach these challenges?" Sarah took a deep breath, grateful for the shift in topic. It gave her a chance to regain her footing. She spoke confidently about her previous work in marketing, detailing her experience with project management and team leadership. She explained how, despite being relatively young, she had taken charge of several projects, guiding her teams through tight deadlines and high-pressure situations. It felt good to talk about her accomplishments, especially in front of someone who seemed genuinely interested. As she spoke, James nodded, absorbing every word. He was a good listener, Sarah thought, the kind of listener who didn't just hear the words but try to understand the meaning behind them. His eyes never left her face, and for a moment, she felt as though the rest of the world had faded away. The room, the office building, even her worries about Emily, all seemed to disappear. The conversation continued, and Sarah's nerves began to settle. The more she spoke, the more comfortable she became, finding herself immersed in the flow of the interview. She could tell that James was impressed, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that she could actually land this job. Maybe this was her moment, the one that could change everything for her and Emily. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. Despite the warm, engaging conversation, there was a certain distance between them that she couldn't quite place. It wasn't coldness, exactly. More like a veil that had fallen over the interaction, something faint but present. Then, as the interview began to wind down, James leaned forward slightly in his chair. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than before, "I have to say, you've really impressed me today. You're exactly the type of person we're looking for, passionate, driven, and with the kind of leadership skills we need." Sarah felt a flush of pride. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and hearing those words was a validation she didn't even realize she needed. But before she could respond, James added, "There's just one more thing that I need to ask." Her heart skipped a beat. "Of course," she replied, trying to keep her composure. James hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on her. "I just want to know, what motivates you to work this hard? Why do you put in all this effort, even when things are tough?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah felt a pang of emotion in her chest. She knew what he was asking. It wasn't just about career ambition. It was about the fire that drove her every day, the one that kept her going even when she was exhausted, when she felt like giving up. Without thinking, Sarah answered honestly, "My daughter. Everything I do is for her. She's the reason I keep going. I want to make sure she has a better life, one that's filled with opportunities one never had." There it was, the truth she had always carried with her, the truth that had been the driving force behind all her decisions. It felt good to say it out loud, even though she hadn't planned to share something so personal in an interview. James was quiet for a moment. His eyes softened, and he leaned back in his chair, looking at her with an expression that seemed almost knowing. Sarah couldn't quite explain it, but she sensed that something had changed in the room. It was as if the barrier that had been there before had suddenly disappeared, replaced by something deeper, more intimate. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said quietly. "And that's exactly the kind of person we need here. Someone who doesn't just do the job for the paycheck, but for something much more meaningful." Sarah smiled, grateful for his understanding. The interview had taken a turn, and she felt as though they had reached a moment of connection, something beyond the surface-level questions and answers. For a brief second, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was more than just a job interview. Maybe this was the beginning of something greater. The sound of the door opening broke the moment. James stood up, extending his hand to her once more. "Thank you for coming in today, Sarah. We'll be in touch soon." As Sarah shook his hand, she felt a sense of finality, as though the interview had come to an end. But as she turned to leave, she caught one last glimpse of James's face, and she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this encounter than she had realized. She walked out of the room with a mixture of excitement and confusion swirling inside her. The interview had gone well, better than she had expected, but there was something about James's reaction to the photo of Emily, something that lingered in her mind long after the interview was over. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more complicated than she had imagined. Little did she know, she had just crossed paths with a man whose life was about to be irrevocably changed by the very thing she had come to the interview to discuss. Her daughter, Emily. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even after the interview ended. As she walked out of the polished, sleek building and into the warmth of the late afternoon sun, her thoughts were a whirlwind. The conversation with James had gone better than she'd hoped, but there was something that stuck with her, a lingering sensation, a tugging at the back of her mind. It wasn't just his kind words, or the way he had looked at her daughter's photo. No, it was something deeper, something unspoken that seemed to connect them in a way she hadn't anticipated. The drive home felt like an eternity. Sarah kept replaying the moments from the interview in her mind. The way James had frozen when he looked at the photo, his expression softening before he quickly returned to his professional persona. There was something about it that didn't sit right. He had been moved by her daughter's picture, but not in a way that was typical of a hiring manager. The way his eyes had lingered, almost as if there was recognition in them, a fleeting, haunted look. Sarah could barely put it into words, but the feeling gnawed at her. Emily was waiting for her when she arrived home. The sight of her little girl's bright smile, her messy blonde hair, and the sparkle in her deep blue eyes made all of Sarah's worries melt away. Emily ran toward her, arms outstretched, ready for a hug. The moment was pure, untainted by the complexities of adulthood. But even as she hugged her daughter tightly, Sarah couldn't help but feel like she was holding on to something more, something she couldn't quite grasp. That night, as Sarah tucked Emily into bed, she tried to push the unsettling feeling from her mind. She kissed her daughter's forehead, smoothed the blanket over her small body, and whispered, "I love you, sweetheart." Emily giggled sleepily, pulling her teddy bear closer. Sarah smiled, but the unease wouldn't go away. Later, after Emily had drifted off to sleep, Sarah sat on the couch with a cup of tea, staring at the phone in her hand. She had meant to call her best friend, Mia, to talk about the interview. But instead, she found herself scrolling through her social media feed, the images of other people's perfect lives making her feel small and insignificant. It wasn't the first time she'd felt that way, but tonight, it was different. Tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Just as she was about to put the phone down, a message popped up. It was from the company. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message. The subject line read, "Next steps in the hiring process." She clicked on it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside the message, it was brief and to the point. "Dear Sarah, we are pleased to inform you that we would like to move forward with the next stage of the interview process. Please let us know your availability for a second round of interviews. We look forward to speaking with you further." A sense of relief washed over her, followed quickly by disbelief. She had made it through. She had actually made it to the next stage. But there was still something nagging at her. Despite the excitement of the moment, Sarah couldn't shake the strange sensation she had felt during the interview. Why had James reacted the way he did when he saw the picture of Emily? She decided to push the thought aside for the time being. It didn't matter, she told herself. What mattered was that she had the opportunity, and that was all that counted. She quickly replied to the email, confirming her availability for the next round of interviews. The next day, Sarah was back at work, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. She had a pile of reports to review, a team meeting to attend, and a deadline that loomed large. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the interview, to James, to Emily's photo. There was something about him, something in the way he had looked at her, that made her heart beat faster and her pulse quicken. She had met many people in her career, but none like him. At the same time, Sarah couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Why was she so distracted by this man? She had always kept her personal life separate from her work life. She didn't have time for distractions, especially not ones that came in the form of handsome, mysterious men like James. But the more she thought about him, the more she realized that there was something different about their interaction. It wasn't just about the job. It wasn't just about Emily's picture. It was something deeper, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged. That afternoon, as Sarah sat at her desk reviewing emails, she received a notification that made her stomach drop. It was a LinkedIn message from James. The message was simple, but the timing felt odd. "Hi Sarah, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to thank you again for coming in for the interview. It was a pleasure getting to know you. I look forward to seeing you again in the second round." Just a standard professional message, but for some reason, it made Sarah's heart race. There was something in the way he phrased it, something that felt just a little too personal for a simple interview follow-up. She sat there, staring at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. What should she say? Should she reply with something formal, or was this an opening for something more? But she quickly reminded herself, This wasn't the time to overthink things. She was here for the job, not for anything else. She typed a quick reply. "Thank you, James. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the next round." As soon as she hit send, she immediately regretted it. She had been so careful, so focused on professionalism, that she had ignored the subtle undercurrent in their interactions. And now, she felt a twinge of doubt creeping in. Was she reading too much into this? Was she allowing herself to become distracted by a man who, for all intents and purposes, was simply a colleague? Still, no matter how much she tried to push the thought aside, something told her that this wouldn't be the last time she saw James. A few days passed, and life began to fall back into its usual rhythm. Sarah went through her daily routine, working hard, caring for Emily, keeping her head down. She knew she had to keep pushing forward. The second interview was coming up, and she wanted to be prepared. But in the quiet moments, when the world seemed to slow down, her mind kept returning to James. It was the way his eyes had looked when he saw Emily's photo, the way his expression had shifted, as though something deep inside of him had recognized her. Something that Sarah couldn't understand but couldn't ignore. And then it hit her. What if she wasn't the only one with a story to tell? What if James had a connection to Emily that neither of them could yet explain? As Sarah made her way through the days, she couldn't help but wonder, what was it about that moment, that brief glance between them, that felt so significant? What was it about Emily's photo that had caused James to freeze? The answers were still beyond her reach, but she knew one thing for sure. She was about to uncover a truth that would change everything for all three of them. The days passed, and Sarah tried her best to focus on the present. She buried herself in work and kept busy with her responsibilities as a mother, but James lingered in her thoughts. There was something about the way he had frozen when he saw Emily's photo, something about the look in his eyes, that she couldn't shake. She couldn't stop wondering if there was more to that moment than she realized. It wasn't just the usual professional curiosity. It felt personal, even emotional. And what if it wasn't just a coincidence? What if it had something to do with her daughter? But there was no clear answer. Only questions that seemed to grow bigger the more she tried to ignore them. Was it possible that James knew something about Emily's past? Was it possible that their paths had crossed before, in a way that neither of them remembered? It was a thought that both intrigued and terrified Sarah. She had no reason to believe there was any connection between them beyond the interview. But the more she thought about it, the more she was convinced that she couldn't dismiss the feeling. She found herself reviewing the moments from the interview over and over again. It wasn't just the way he had looked at Emily's photo, but the way he had seemed to hesitate before asking about her motivations. His voice had softened when she mentioned her daughter, and for a split second, she could have sworn she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that went beyond professional interest. Something personal. It wasn't just about the job, she realized. It was about her. About Emily. The thought made her heart race. Was there something about her daughter that James recognized? And if so, what was it? She couldn't deny the growing suspicion that whatever it was more than a coincidence. Her second-round interview was scheduled for the following week, and although Sarah was determined to stay focused on the job, she couldn't shake the feeling that the interview was only part of the story. She had to know more. She needed answers. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Sarah sat down at her desk and pulled up her laptop. She had avoided it until now, but she knew she couldn't put it off any longer. She needed to dig deeper. She began by searching for James's name, hoping to find some clue, some detail that might explain his strange reaction during the interview. She found his LinkedIn profile first. It was straightforward, his job title, his educational background, his career trajectory. But there was nothing that stood out as particularly personal. He was well accomplished, a high-level executive with years of experience. No mention of family. No mention of anything that might connect him to Emily. Next, Sarah tried a broader search. James's name along with the company's name. She combed through articles, press releases, and company announcements, but again, there was nothing remarkable. She found a few photos of him at corporate events, but nothing that would explain the strange feeling she had about him. She sighed in frustration, feeling as though she had hit a dead end. Just as she was about to close her laptop, a thought struck her. What if she searched for the company's records? Maybe there was something in the company's history that could explain the strange connection she felt. Maybe someone in his past knew Emily or had worked with her. She hesitated for a moment. It was a long shot, but the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that she had to try. She typed in the company's name, followed by employees and family connections. She had no idea what she was looking for, but she was willing to take any chance she could. Then, a result popped up. It was a news article from several years ago, one that she had missed in her previous search. The headline read, "CEO's Family Crisis, a personal story that changed everything." Her breath caught in her throat as she clicked on the link. The article was older, dated several years back, but it was still relevant. As she began reading, she discovered that the CEO, James's boss, had gone through a personal tragedy. The article spoke of a family emergency, a loss that had shaken the company's leadership to its core. But what caught Sarah's eye was a detail buried deep within the story. The CEO had a young daughter who had been involved in a tragic accident. The article didn't go into the specifics, but it mentioned that the family had withdrawn from the public eye after the incident, seeking privacy and healing. It was a detail that had never been fully explained, and the company had kept the story out of the media as much as possible. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she read the words. Could James, this man she had just met, be connected to that story? Could he have been the one to suffer that loss, to experience the kind of pain she could barely imagine? Was he the father of the child who had been in that accident? Her hands trembled as she clicked through the article, trying to find more details, but the information was scarce. There were only a few lines that referenced the tragedy, and nothing that connected it to James directly. But Sarah couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the truth was right in front of her. She sat back in her chair, the weight of the realization heavy on her shoulders. James's reaction to Emily's photo, his hesitation, his softening expression, it wasn't just about her daughter's innocence or beauty. It was something far deeper, something personal. Sarah didn't know for sure, but she was starting to believe that the connection between James and Emily was no coincidence. The details were still unclear, but one thing was certain. James's past, and the grief he had experienced, was intertwined with her own life in ways she hadn't anticipated. She didn't know where this was going, but she had a feeling that she was about to find out. As the night wore on, Sarah sat in the quiet of her apartment, her thoughts a tangled mess. She knew one thing for certain. This second interview was not going to be just about the job. It was going to be about uncovering the truth, about unraveling a mystery that seemed destined to change everything. And, deep down, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and excitement. She was on the brink of discovering something huge, something that would alter the course of her life and Emily's forever. But what would she do once she had the answers? Would she be prepared for what she might find? Only time would tell. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah knew the second round of interviews was fast approaching, but her mind was consumed with the growing mystery surrounding James. She had barely slept, her thoughts racing as she pieced together the information she had uncovered. The connection between James and the tragedy involving his boss's daughter had only deepened her suspicions. She couldn't shake the feeling that James knew something about Emily, something more than just a passing interest in her photo. What could it mean? What were the chances that two completely unrelated people would find themselves in such an intricate situation? The more Sarah thought about it, the more it seemed that fate, or something far more powerful, had drawn her and James together for a reason. But was she ready for what she might uncover? Was she ready to face the truth? The days leading up to the second round of interviews felt like an eternity. Sarah had always prided herself on her professionalism, her ability to stay focused and calm under pressure. But now, every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced back to the unanswered questions about James and his connection to Emily. She had tried to push it aside, focusing on preparing for the interview, but it was no use. The mystery had become all-consuming. On the morning of the interview, Sarah found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror, adjusting the collar of her blouse and straightening the fabric of her skirt. It was the same routine she had followed for years before every important meeting. Calm, composed, confident. But today, there was a tension in the air that she couldn't shake. Today wasn't just about a job. Today, she felt, was about uncovering the truth. When Sarah arrived at the company building, she was met by the receptionist, who directed her to the elevator. Her pulse quickened as the doors closed, taking her up to the top floor. She tried to steady her nerves, reminding herself that she was there for a reason. She had worked hard to get this far. But as the elevator dinged and the doors opened, She knew this was not going to be just another interview. James was waiting for her in a sleek, modern conference room. The sunlight filtered in through the large windows, casting a soft glow over the room. He stood when she entered, offering a polite smile, but there was something in his eyes that made Sarah's heart race. The same look she had seen before, the same lingering recognition, the same unspoken connection. "Sarah, welcome back," James said, his voice warm, but there was a trace of something else, something more personal beneath the surface. "Thank you, James. It's good to be here," Sarah replied, her voice steady, though inside, her mind was spinning. They sat down at the table, and for a moment, the conversation focused on the usual interview topics: her experience, her skills, her career goals. But Sarah could feel the tension between them, like an invisible thread pulling them closer despite the formalities of the meeting. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to ask. "James," she began, her voice hesitant but determined. "There's something that's been on my mind since our first meeting. Something that's been bothering me." He looked at her curiously, his brow furrowing slightly, though he didn't say anything. "It's about Emily," Sarah continued. "The way you reacted when you saw her photo during the interview. I couldn't help but notice that it seemed like you recognized her. Or at least, you were affected by it in a way that didn't seem just professional." James froze, his expression shifting ever so slightly. For a moment, Sarah thought he might deny it, or brush it off as nothing. But instead, he sighed, his shoulders sagging as if a weight he had been carrying for a long time had finally become too heavy to ignore. "I knew you'd ask about it eventually," James said softly, his gaze dropping to the table. He didn't seem to be avoiding eye contact, but rather struggling with something deep inside him. "I wasn't expecting to see her picture, but when I did, it triggered something I've been trying to forget for a long time." Sarah leaned forward, her heart beating faster. "What do you mean? Do you know her?" James looked up at her then, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. "Yes," he whispered. "I do know her, but not in the way you think." The room seemed to grow still as Sarah absorbed his words. She could feel the air around them thickening with unspoken truths. She waited for him to continue, but for a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched on, heavy with the weight of his unspoken history. Finally, James took a deep breath and began to explain. "Several years ago, my family, we lost someone very important. My daughter, Lily, was just about the same age as Emily when she passed away. It was a tragic accident, a car crash. She and her mother were involved in a collision on a rainy night, and Lily didn't survive." Sarah's heart stopped as the weight of his words sank in. Her thoughts spun wildly, trying to process what he was saying. She had never expected this, never imagined that the man across from her was carrying a grief so profound. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. James nodded, his jaw tightening. "Thank you. But the thing is, I've spent so many years trying to move past it, trying to bury the pain. But when I saw Emily's picture, it reminded me of her, of Lily, the way she looked at the world, with that same innocence and wonder. And the eyes. Emily has the same eyes, the same deep blue eyes that Lily had. It was like a punch to the gut. I never expected to see something so familiar in someone I had just met." Sarah's heart ached as she listened to his story. She could see the raw pain in his expression, the grief that had never fully healed. She had suspected there was a deeper connection, but hearing the truth was something else entirely. She couldn't imagine the agony of losing a child, and now, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, she understood why James had reacted the way he did. "But how is that possible?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "How could she have eyes like Lily's? Emily is my daughter. She's mine." James looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "I don't know," he replied softly. "But I think there's something I need to explain. I never told you this before, but Emily, she's not just your daughter. She's mine too." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the magnitude of his statement settled over her. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She had to have misunderstood. There was no way this could be real. James reached for his phone, and without saying another word, he tapped on the screen, pulling up an old photo. He slid the phone across the table to Sarah. In the photo, a little girl with the same deep blue eyes as Emily was smiling up at the camera, holding onto the hand of a woman Sarah didn't recognize. "This is Lily," James said quietly. "She was mine, Sarah. And I think Emily is hers." The air in the room felt thick with unspoken truths. Sarah's mind spun wildly as she stared at the photo, trying to comprehend what James had just revealed. The little girl in the picture was undeniably Lily, James's daughter. And the resemblance between Lily and Emily was striking. The same eyes, the same smile. Sarah felt as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting, as though her entire reality was being rewritten before her eyes. How could this be? How could Emily, her precious daughter, be connected to James in such an intimate way? What did this mean for her, for Emily, for their lives? She slowly looked up at James, her heart pounding in her chest. "But how?" she whispered. "How is this even possible?" James's face was pale, his eyes filled with a pain that he could no longer hide. "I don't know, Sarah, but I've been following Emily's life from a distance, watching her grow. And the more I see of her, the more I realize how much she's like Lily. I know this is going to be hard to believe, but I think there's a reason for all of this. A reason why we're connected again." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. There was so much to process, so much she didn't understand. She needed time. Time to think, to make sense of this impossible situation. Do you think Emily knows?" she asked, her voice trembling. James shook his head slowly. "I don't think so, but I'm certain that she's the key to something bigger, something that could change all of our lives." As Sarah sat there, the weight of his words settled on her like a heavy fog. The mystery of their connection was only beginning to unravel, but one thing was clear: nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The rest of the interview seemed to pass in a blur, but Sarah could hardly focus on anything but the truth James had just revealed. There was no denying it now. Emily was connected to him in ways she never imagined. And while the initial shock was overwhelming, a sense of curiosity and hope began to take root in Sarah's heart. What did this mean for Emily? What did this mean for her future? As she left the conference room and walked out of the building, her thoughts swirled with questions. She had come to the interview looking for a job, but now she was walking away with answers to a mystery that had haunted her for months. And yet, despite the uncertainty, a small part of her felt hopeful. Hopeful that the truth would lead them to something better. Something she could never have expected. Tomorrow, she would have more questions. But for tonight, she knew only one thing for certain. Life had just become infinitely more complicated. Sarah left the building, her mind still reeling from everything she had just learned. It was hard to concentrate on anything, the rush of emotions clouding her judgment. Her footsteps were mechanical as she walked to her car, but even as she slid into the driver's seat and buckled her seatbelt, a part of her remained rooted to that conference room. Emily, James, Lily. The connection was so surreal, so improbable, and yet, in some strange way, it made sense. Sarah had always wondered why Emily seemed to possess such a depth of character for someone so young. She had always known her daughter was special, but now, the mystery behind Emily's gaze, the way people sometimes commented on her eyes, suddenly felt much deeper. Now, those same eyes that captivated others held the key to something far more significant than Sarah had ever imagined. Her phone buzzed in her purse, snapping her out of her reverie. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from her best friend, Kate. "How did it go?" "Any news?" Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she thought about how to respond. She wanted to tell Kate everything. The secrets, the mystery, the haunting connection. But no, she couldn't just share it all over text. She needed to process it first. Instead, she replied with a simple, vague message. "It went well. I think I have the job, but I'll tell you more later." She could feel the weight of her secret pressing down on her as she put her phone back into her bag and started the car. As she drove home, the silence in the car felt suffocating, as though the truth of what had been revealed had somehow sealed off the world outside. The idea that Emily could be James's daughter, it was too much to fully grasp, but Sarah knew one thing for sure. Her life had just changed in ways she wasn't sure she was ready for. By the time Sarah reached home, she was emotionally exhausted. Emily's laughter filled the apartment as soon as Sarah opened the door, the sight of her little girl playing with her toys bringing a sense of normalcy, of calm. But as Sarah stood in the doorway, watching Emily, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. The truth she was now holding, the truth about Emily's origins, seemed so heavy, so overwhelming. Could she protect her daughter from the repercussions of this knowledge? Could she even protect herself? Mom, look, I made a tower. Emily's excited voice broke through Sarah's thoughts. Sarah smiled, forcing the tension out of her body, and walked over to where her daughter was playing. She sat down beside her, marveling at the colorful blocks that formed an impressive tower. But as Sarah smiled and nodded in approval, a part of her mind kept returning to the conversation with James. What if Emily is connected to him? What does that mean for her? For me? She took a deep breath, pushing those thoughts to the back of her mind, if only for a moment. There would be time to think about all of this later. Right now, Emily needed her, and Sarah wasn't ready to let go of the mother-daughter bond they had. She refused to let anything or anyone come between them. The following days were a blur for Sarah. She was flooded with questions, uncertainties, and a deep sense of dread. Emily seemed to have no idea what was going on, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. She was still the same sweet, innocent girl she had always been. Sarah tried her best to maintain her routine, taking Emily to daycare, going to work, but the weight of the truth loomed over her. Sarah spent hours after work searching for more information, trying to piece together the story behind James's past and what it meant for her and Emily. But as much as she dug, there were no easy answers. There were more questions than she had started with, and each new discovery only seemed to complicate things further. Why did James think Emily was connected to his late daughter? Was there some kind of mix-up? Was it all just a coincidence? The more Sarah tried to make sense of it, the less she felt like she understood. But what struck her most was how James had reacted when he spoke of his daughter, Lily. There had been so much raw pain in his voice, so much grief. And it wasn't just the loss of a child. It was a loss that had left scars deep within him. The way he spoke about her, about Emily, Sarah realized that there was something far more complicated at play than she could have imagined. James didn't just want to know Emily because of her resemblance to Lily. There was something more at stake here. Something that connected him to Emily in a way Sarah hadn't been prepared for. One evening, unable to bear the weight of the questions any longer, Sarah called Kate. She needed to talk to someone who didn't have the emotional stakes in the situation, someone who could give her a fresh perspective. I can't believe it, Kate, Sarah said, her voice tight as she paced around the living room. I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind, but I think I'm being pulled into a situation I don't fully understand. James knows something. He says Emily's connected to him in a way that I can't ignore, and I don't know what to think. I don't even know what to do. Kate was quiet on the other end of the phone, and then, after a long pause, she spoke. Sarah, I know this is crazy. I know it feels like your whole world is spinning out of control. But you've got to think about Emily's safety first. No matter what's going on, no matter how bizarre this situation seems, you have to protect her. You have to protect her from whatever this is. I don't know how to protect her from something I don't even understand, Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know where this is going, but it feels like it's going to change everything. I just want to know the truth. I need to know what's really happening. I get that, Kate said softly. But don't let it consume you. Don't let this take over your life, your relationship with Emily. You have to keep things in perspective. Whatever the truth is, Emily is still your daughter. That bond, that love, that's what matters. Sarah took a deep breath. Kate's words were a balm to her frayed nerves, but they didn't make the mystery go away. You're right. I need to figure this out, Kate. I need to know what's going on. As they hung up, Sarah sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the conversation settle in her chest. What would she find if she uncovered the truth? Would it destroy everything she had worked for, everything she had built with Emily? But Sarah knew one thing. She couldn't let this mystery go. Not when it had the potential to change their lives forever. Days passed, and Sarah found herself facing a crossroads. The questions were only growing, but so too were the fears. She had to decide. Would she dig deeper and risk unraveling everything? Or would she leave it all behind and protect Emily from the truth she wasn't yet ready to understand? No matter what decision she made, Sarah knew that Emily would always be her daughter. And that bond, whatever else happened, would be the one thing that could never be taken from her. But with every unanswered question, Sarah knew that the answers would inevitably come. She just had to decide how much she was willing to sacrifice to find them. Sarah sat in her quiet living room, the hum of the refrigerator in the background providing the only sound that broke the silence. Emily had just gone to bed, her little feet still kicking under the blankets, her peaceful face showing no sign of the storm that was brewing just beyond her world. Sarah's heart ached as she looked at her daughter's serene expression. She wanted so badly to protect Emily from all the uncertainty, from all the fear and confusion that had begun to shadow their lives. But Sarah also knew that the truth, whatever it was, could no longer remain buried. It had already begun to unravel everything she thought she knew. The evening had been spent in contemplation, and now, as the night deepened, Sarah felt a sense of quiet resolve. She couldn't keep running from the truth. She couldn't keep denying the undeniable connections between Emily and James. As much as she longed for answers, she knew that finding them might bring more pain she wasn't sure she or Emily could handle. But what was the alternative? To live in ignorance forever? To let the questions linger and gnaw at her, pulling her apart? No, she couldn't let it go on like this. There was no going back. Sarah knew that now. Taking a deep breath, she stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights below. In the distance, the glow of street lamps reflected off the pavement, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the windowsill as she thought about James. The way he had spoken about Lily. The way his grief seemed to mirror her own, his loss, his pain. And then the revelation that Emily might not just be her daughter, but somehow tied to him, to his past, to his family. It was almost too much to process. But it felt real. More real than anything else she had known in the past few days. I need to speak to him, Sarah thought. I need to hear the full story. I need to understand everything. The questions were overwhelming, but the truth was even more urgent. She couldn't stay in the dark any longer, and the only way to know the full story was to face it head-on, to confront James and ask him the hard questions that had been simmering in her mind for days. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her phone and dialed his number. She had hoped, almost unconsciously, that she could avoid this conversation for a little while longer. But the pull of the truth was stronger than her fear. The phone rang twice before James picked up. His voice was soft when he answered. "Hello, Sarah. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It's about what you said, the connection between Emily and your daughter." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then James spoke, his tone cautious but not surprised. "I knew you'd reach out. I know this is a lot to process. I didn't mean to shock you like this, but the truth is—" "I know," Sarah interrupted gently, her heart racing. "I know it's hard to explain, but I need to understand. Emily and Lily, they look alike. She has the same eyes. But how is it possible? Why would you think that Emily is connected to her? I need to know everything, James. I need to understand why this is happening. I can't keep carrying these questions around. Not anymore." James let out a deep sigh, the kind of sigh that seemed to come from a place of long-suppressed grief. Sarah could hear the hesitation in his voice before he spoke again. "I wasn't expecting this," he said quietly. "But I think it's time you knew everything. Emily, she's not just connected to Lily through her eyes. She's connected through a bloodline. A bloodline that's tangled up in a family secret I've been keeping for years." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know if she was ready to hear more, but she didn't have a choice. The truth was already unraveling, and she couldn't stop it. "Are you saying that Emily and Lily are connected somehow?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "What do you mean by a bloodline? What is this secret?" There was another long pause before James spoke again, and when he did, his voice was heavy with emotion. "There's a story I've never told anyone. It's about my family, about something that happened a long time ago. It's a complicated history, one that's filled with loss and mistakes. And it's a story I've kept hidden for years. But the truth is, Emily isn't just connected to Lily by resemblance. She's connected to her by something deeper, something I only found out about after Lily passed away." Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest, but she forced herself to listen, to hear James out. She needed to know how this tangled history connected to her daughter. "You see, Sarah," James continued, "Lily wasn't the only child I lost. There was another daughter. Her name was Isabella, and she was born several years before Lily. But she didn't survive. She died in infancy, just before Lily was born. It was a devastating blow to our family, one that left us shattered. I thought I'd lost everything. But then, years later, I found out that Isabella's bloodline had continued in a way no one could have expected." Sarah's head was spinning. She had never heard of Isabella. The grief in James's voice was raw, and she could feel the weight of his words bearing down on her. But the pieces weren't fitting together. What did this have to do with Emily? "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice quiet, barely above a whisper. "What does Isabella's bloodline have to do with Emily?" James took a long, steadying breath before he answered. "When Emily was born," he began, "I learned something. Something I didn't want to believe at first. But it's true. Emily, she's not just your daughter. She's also my granddaughter. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mind couldn't wrap around them. Granddaughter? The connection was so much deeper than she could have imagined. So much more complicated. It felt as if the world itself had shifted beneath her feet. Your granddaughter? Sarah echoed, her voice thick with disbelief. How is that possible? Emily is my daughter. There's no way she could be your granddaughter. James's voice trembled as he spoke. I never knew about Isabella's survival, Sarah. But when I looked at Emily, I began to see signs that were impossible to ignore. Her eyes, those eyes, are the same as Isabella's. And then, after doing some research, I found out that Emily shares blood with my daughter. Your daughter, Sarah, is a direct descendant of Isabella. The bloodline runs deep. Sarah felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every moment she thought she understood her daughter's life. Every moment she thought she had a handle on what her world was supposed to be. It slipped further and further from her grasp. And now this revelation, this unimaginable truth, had turned her life upside down. James? I don't know what to say, Sarah whispered. This is too much. I need time to process this. I understand, James replied softly. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I think you need to know. You deserve to know the truth. As the call ended, Sarah sat there, stunned and speechless. The world felt like it was spinning out of control, but one thing was clear. The story of Emily's life was far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. The weight of everything Sarah had learned over the past few days settled in her chest like a heavy stone. She didn't know where this journey would take her, or how the truth would affect Emily. But one thing she knew for sure. She had to protect her daughter, no matter what it cost. Sarah would not let go of the love she had for Emily, no matter how tangled their family history had become. And as she stared out the window into the quiet night, she knew she would fight to protect their future. The truth had come to light. And now, Sarah had to figure out what came next. The weight of everything Sarah had learned over the past few days settled heavily on her chest, like a stone pressing down on her heart. Her thoughts were scattered, her mind racing with questions, doubts, and fears that she couldn't seem to silence. How had she gone from being a mother, focused on the everyday moments of her daughter's life, to being embroiled in a family secret that seemed to span generations? The truth she had learned about Emily's heritage felt like a tidal wave that had crashed into her life, and she wasn't sure how to stay afloat. The phone call with James still echoed in her mind. Your daughter is my granddaughter. The words felt so surreal, as if they didn't belong in her world. How could Emily be connected to someone like James? Someone she barely knew. Someone whose life was filled with so much loss and pain. The pieces were all there, but the picture they formed was one Sarah wasn't ready to understand. But despite the confusion, Sarah knew she couldn't turn her back on the truth. The reality of Emily's bloodline was a game changer. It meant that her daughter's future, her safety, and her identity could no longer be viewed through the lens of simple motherhood. There were forces at play here, forces tied to her daughter's very existence, that Sarah didn't fully understand, and that scared her more than anything else. Yet, beneath all the fear and uncertainty, Sarah felt a fierce protective instinct rising within her. She had never felt more determined to safeguard her daughter's future. No matter what the truth was, no matter the history behind Emily's origins, Sarah was still Emily's mother. That was the one thing that remained certain, the one thing she could hold on to in the midst of this storm. As Sarah stared out the window into the darkened night, she couldn't shake the image of Emily's face. The way her daughter's eyes seemed to reflect something deeper, something older, than Sarah had ever realized. The same eyes that had captivated strangers, that had drawn so much attention in the past, were now the key to understanding the family secrets James had revealed. But even as Sarah grappled with this new reality, a deep love for her daughter flooded her heart. Nothing, not even the revelation of a hidden bloodline, would change the bond they shared. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, the early rays of sunlight filtering through the blinds and casting a soft glow over the apartment. Emily was still asleep, her small body curled up under the blanket, her breathing steady and peaceful. Sarah stood by her daughter's bed for a moment, watching her sleep, before gently brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. In that moment, Emily looked so innocent, so untouched by the complexities of the world. But Sarah knew that would soon change. The truth about Emily's heritage couldn't be hidden forever. And as much as Sarah wanted to protect her from it, she also knew that Emily had a right to know who she was, who she truly was. But how could Sarah explain all of this to her little girl? How could she make sense of a past that wasn't just hers, but also tied to James and a family legacy she hadn't chosen? The thought of having to tell Emily one day felt impossible. But Sarah knew that, just like every other parent, she couldn't shelter her child from the reality of the world. The world would eventually reach her, and Sarah needed to be the one to help Emily navigate it. So much was at stake, not just for Emily but for their entire future together. As the day wore on, Sarah's thoughts returned to James. She still couldn't fully grasp everything he had told her, but his grief was undeniable. There was a pain in his voice when he spoke of his lost daughters, especially Lily. Sarah could feel the weight of that pain, and it made her wonder what his intentions were. Did he want to be part of Emily's life? What did he hope to achieve by telling her all of this? The uncertainty of James's role in their future lingered in Sarah's mind, but there was one thing she knew for certain. She couldn't navigate this on her own. She needed to talk to him again, to understand more of his perspective, to hear his side of the story. She needed to know what he wanted from this revelation and what role he saw himself playing in Emily's life, if any. Taking a deep breath, Sarah picked up her phone again. She stared at James's number for a long moment before finally pressing dial. The phone rang, and as it did, her heart raced. She had no idea what this conversation would bring, but it felt like a necessary step toward unraveling the tangled web of emotions and secrets that now connected them all. When James answered, his voice was cautious but not surprised. "Sarah," he said softly, "I didn't expect you to call so soon. Is everything okay?" "I'm still processing everything you told me," Sarah said, her voice steady but strained. "I need to understand more about what you meant when you said Emily was your granddaughter. I need to know where you fit into all of this, what your intentions are, and what this means for her." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then James sighed deeply. "I know this is a lot to take in, Sarah, and I know it's overwhelming, especially for you and Emily. But I'm not asking for anything from you. I don't expect you to suddenly accept me as a part of your life. I just think it's important that you know the truth. If Emily is truly part of my family, if she is my granddaughter, then I want to offer her something. I want her to know where she comes from. I want her to know the history that's tied to her." Sarah listened carefully, trying to make sense of his words. "And what does that mean for me? For Emily's life?" "I can't say what it will mean for her life, Sarah," James replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I want you to know that I'll respect whatever you decide. I just want Emily to have the truth, whatever that truth is. If you decide that you want to keep your distance, I'll understand. But I need you to know that I'm here. And if you want me to be a part of her life, I'll do whatever I can to be there for her." Sarah felt a mixture of emotions flooding through her. James's words were sincere, and she believed him when he said he wanted to help. But she still didn't know what role he could or should play in their lives. The idea of introducing him to Emily, of allowing him to be a part of her daughter's life, seemed like such a big step, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to take. "I don't know what to say, James," Sarah said, her voice heavy with indecision. "This is all so new. I need time to think. I need to understand what this means for me, for Emily, and for our future." "I understand," James replied gently. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." The call ended, and Sarah sat in silence for a few moments, her mind spinning. What had she just agreed to? What did the future hold for her and Emily? The questions were endless, and the uncertainty was suffocating. But one thing was clear: the truth had been revealed. And now, Sarah had to decide what to do with it. She had to decide how much of her daughter's past she could uncover and how much of it would change their future. For now, though, all she could do was hold her daughter close, keep her safe, and try to navigate this new reality one step at a time. As Sarah sat with her thoughts, she realized one undeniable truth: nothing in her life would ever be the same. And for better or for worse, she would have to find a way forward. But the road ahead was uncertain, and every choice she made would affect not only her life, but also Emily's. The unknown path stretched out before her, and she had no idea where it would lead. The days that followed felt like walking through a dense fog. Every morning, Sarah would wake up with a heavy heart, her mind replaying the conversation with James over and over. She found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about her life, about Emily, and even about herself. The simplicity of her world had shattered, replaced by a complex web of secrets, lost connections, and hidden truths. Sarah tried to focus on the everyday things, packing Emily's lunch, dropping her off at daycare, responding to emails at work, but the sense of unease never truly left her. It clung to her, a constant reminder that her life had forever changed. She felt torn between wanting to protect Emily from the truth and the realization that shielding her from it might be impossible. One afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting in a small cafe near her office, staring into her cup of coffee, as if the swirling steam held the answers she sought. She was exhausted, her mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. She hadn't been sleeping well, the weight of the revelations from James haunting her even in the quiet hours of the night. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Kate, her best friend. "Hey, how are you holding up? Haven't heard from you in a while. Want to catch up?" Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. She hadn't told Kate about the latest revelations. She hadn't told anyone, really. It felt too raw, too unreal to share. But maybe that's what she needed, a friend to help her make sense of the chaos. "Hey, I'm okay. Just a lot on my mind. Can we meet up later?" She typed back, her heart racing slightly as she hit send. It felt like the first step toward making sense of the whirlwind her life had become. That evening, Sarah met Kate at their usual spot, a cozy wine bar with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. It was the kind of place that made you feel like the world outside had paused for a moment, allowing you to breathe. Sarah hoped the familiar setting would help her gather her thoughts. But as soon as she sat down and looked into Kate's concerned eyes, the emotions she had been holding back came rushing to the surface. "What's going on, Sarah?" Kate asked, leaning in, her voice low but urgent. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Is everything okay with Emily?" Sarah took a deep breath, the weight of her fears settling in her chest. She looked down at her glass of wine, the deep red liquid swirling gently as she tried to find the right words. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something happened, and it's changing everything. My whole understanding of who Emily is, of who I am as her mother, has been turned upside down." Kate's eyes grew wide, and she reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's arm. "What do you mean? Is Emily okay? Is she sick? What's going on?" No, she's fine. She's perfectly healthy," Sarah replied quickly, shaking her head. "It's not that. It's about her past. About her family. I found out something that I never expected. Something that has completely thrown me off balance." Kate leaned in even closer, her brow furrowing with concern. "Sarah, you're scaring me. Just tell me what happened." Sarah took another deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on her. She knew that once she said the words out loud, once she shared this part of her life with Kate, there would be no turning back. But she also knew she couldn't carry this burden alone any longer. "I found out that Emily might be connected to someone from my past," Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly. "Someone I never thought I'd cross paths with again. Someone who believes that Emily is not just my daughter, but his granddaughter." Kate's mouth fell open, her eyes widening in shock. She blinked, clearly struggling to process what Sarah had just said. "Wait, what? His granddaughter? Are you saying that Emily's biological family is somehow connected to this man? How is that possible?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I don't know, Kate. I'm still trying to piece it all together. But I think he might be right. I think there's a part of Emily's story that I never knew. A part that's connected to a family history I can barely begin to understand." Kate squeezed her arm tightly, her eyes filling with sympathy. "Oh my God, Sarah. I can't even imagine what you must be going through. But whatever this is, whatever the truth turns out to be, you don't have to face it alone. I'm here for you. I'll help you figure this out." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude, the warmth of her friend's support cutting through the cold fear that had taken hold of her heart. For the first time in days, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way through this. Maybe she could find a way to protect Emily while still uncovering the truth about her past. As the night wore on and the two women continued to talk, Sarah felt a sense of clarity slowly returning. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she was no longer alone in her search for them. And that, she realized, was a small but powerful victory. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she felt stronger, more determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had a daughter to protect, a past to uncover, and a future to shape. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take on whatever came next. As she got Emily ready for daycare that morning, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever secrets lay in their past, whatever truths still needed to be uncovered, she would face them head on. Because that's what mothers do. They protect, they fight, and they never give up. And as she kissed Emily on the forehead and watched her little girl skip into the daycare center, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would find the truth, no matter what it took. Because Emily deserved to know where she came from. And Sarah deserved to understand the full story of the life she had built, a life that had turned out to be far more extraordinary than she had ever imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah slowly found herself coming to terms with the revelations about Emily's origins. The initial shock had given way to a deeper, more complex understanding of what it meant to be a mother. She realized that loving Emily went beyond biology or shared blood. It was about the moments they had built together, the laughter, the tears, the quiet evenings reading bedtime stories. It was about the life they had created as a family, regardless of the secrets hidden in the past. But Sarah also knew that she couldn't ignore the truth. She couldn't pretend that the knowledge James had given her would simply fade away. It had taken root in her mind, growing into a persistent, nagging question that wouldn't let her rest. Who was Emily really? And what did her connection to James mean for their future? One afternoon, as she sat on a park bench watching Emily play on the swings, Sarah felt the urge to finally confront these questions. She had been avoiding James's calls for days, unsure if she was ready to face the deeper truths he might reveal. But now, with the sun casting long shadows across the playground and the sound of children's laughter filling the air, she felt a sudden, unexpected clarity. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through her contacts. She hesitated for a moment, her thumb hovering over James's name, before finally pressing the call button. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Sarah?" James's voice was cautious, as if he wasn't sure what to expect. "Hi, James," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I think it's time we talked. Really talked. About everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if he had hung up. But then he spoke, his tone filled with a mix of relief and apprehension. "I'm glad you called," he said softly. "I've been waiting, hoping you would reach out. I know this isn't easy for you, and I want you to know that I'm here to answer any questions you have." Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes following Emily as she swung higher and higher, her little legs kicking at the air. "I just need to understand," she began, her voice firm but laced with emotion. "I need to understand what all of this means. Not just for you and me, but for Emily. What does this connection really mean for her?" James hesitated, his silence stretching across the line. Sarah could almost picture him, sitting in his office, struggling to find the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a deep, almost paternal concern. "It means that Emily is part of a legacy, a family history that I thought had ended with my daughter, Lily. It means that she has a place in a story that is bigger than either of us, a story that I never expected to continue." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "And what does that mean for her future? What are you expecting from us?" "From me? I'm not asking for anything, Sarah," James replied quickly, his tone earnest. "I don't want to take Emily away from you. I would never try to do that. I just want to be a part of her life, if you'll let me. I want to give her a connection to her past, to her heritage. And I want you to know that you're not alone in raising her. I want to be there, however you'll allow me to be." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anxiety wash over her. She had been so afraid that James would try to take Emily from her, that he would push for more than she could handle. But hearing his words, his genuine desire to simply be a part of their lives, eased some of her fears. "I don't know what that looks like yet," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But maybe we can try to figure it out. Slowly. For Emily's sake." James's voice softened, and Sarah could almost hear the smile in his tone. "That's all I can ask for, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you for even considering this." They ended the call on a tentative but hopeful note, both of them aware that this was only the beginning of a long, uncertain journey. But for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, They could find a way to blend their worlds together for the sake of the little girl they both loved so deeply. As Sarah put her phone away and looked back at Emily, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had taken the first step toward facing the truth, and though the path ahead was still uncertain, she no longer felt alone. She had allies, people who cared about her and Emily, people who would stand by her as she navigated this strange new chapter of their lives. And as Emily ran toward her, her face bright with laughter, Sarah felt a powerful, unshakable love fill her heart. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges they faced, she knew they would face them together. Because in the end, love was stronger than fear. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah, James, and Emily found a rhythm to their new, intertwined lives. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of uncertainty, but slowly, they built a fragile but beautiful connection. James became a loving presence in Emily's world, a steady figure who shared stories of the past and dreams for the future. Sarah watched as her daughter flourished, surrounded by love that extended beyond their small apartment, reaching into the corners of a history that had once seemed lost. She realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the bonds they chose to build, the memories they decided to create, and the futures they dared to imagine together. And in those quiet moments, when Emily would curl up in her lap, giggling at James's silly stories or asking about the grandmother she had never met, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She had fought so hard to protect her daughter, to give her the best life possible, and now she saw that her efforts had been worth it. Emily wasn't just her little girl anymore. She was part of a legacy, a story of loss and love, of struggles and triumphs. And as Sarah held her daughter close, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that's what family does. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales that touch the heart. Hit the bell icon to stay updated whenever we post new stories. We appreciate your support and can't wait to share more unforgettable moments with you. See you in the next one.